Hi everyone, welcome back to the River of Truth. Fairies are real. Um, if you have not listened to the Fairy History 1 and 2, I highly recommend you go back and listen to those two videos because this is the continuation and this is the history part 3. I left off in my last video with the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So today I will bring you over to the Americas and the Renaissance. During this time, the Americas were only slightly colonized by the human beings. Primarily, it was the natives and the indigenous tribes. The natives at this point could see the fairies much more clearly than white people. So we all know the difference in cultures between these two groups of people. The Renaissance primarily affected Europe because Europeans have a sense of new beginnings, a sense of understanding how important art and music and beauty could be in creating life. During those times, there was still a great division between the rich and the poor. In Europe, a great deal of the art was influenced by those who were able to see the fae now and then. In Europe, there was a great tendency towards opium back in those days. That was very important to them. Also, some of the alcohol they had was somewhat rough in those days. So they would achieve a state of being that was much more like opening a door. Often, that was not a good thing. However, quite often, they saw the fairies more than any of the Americans did. You could see this in their art and their culture. In America, the indigenous tribes, such as the Mayans, the Native American Indians, all of those who had an understanding all along about the different dimensions would often visit them. They would often see the fairies during those times. Of course, the veil was still there, but often they could see through it. The sad part about it all is that the fae had come to realize that the natives, though they were often involved in wars and fights within nations, within each other's tribes, they were peaceful, loving human beings for the most part anyways. The Aztecs and Mayans had some rituals that were upsetting. They also had ideas about God and space and the sun that were in many ways on the right track, and in some other ways superstitious and naive. As many white European people began to come to America, they started to tell fables to the children about what they would sometimes actually really see. They were the only race that did this for the most part. The fables that were created around incidental visions were useful in creating fear, also in creating a sense of wonder. However, there was never a sense of reality to it. They were in denial of the things that they would actually see from time to time. They simply could not believe their visions to be a reality at all. Whatever truth was in the fables that were told were often dismissed, unfortunately. Such is the idea that fairies exist. Many who believe in fairies, not even having seen them, were dismissed as kooks, quacks, and crazy. This kept up until around the 1900s. However, all through the 1700s and the 1800s, if you spoke of fairies, spirits, or even guides as if they were a reality, there was a tendency to dismiss it as fable, except among the fundamentalist religions. And in that case, everything was overemphasized for the sake of fear. In Europe, fairies were often seen and recognized. and the ones that were human were taken seriously for the most part. The other species of fae that look a little different, and many who did not look or appear human were taken as not friendly. Although all fairies that were of the light were friendly, those who were of different species had no interest in humans whatsoever. Many times these fae would be seen as trolls or goblins. There are many fae that look very much like what is pictured as a troll or goblin, and these words are not pleasant. They're not nice. At least they're not respectful to the fae. And over the past 200 years, there is another word. It is golem. And a golem in Hebrew means a demon. So that has also sadly been assigned to the fae. The fae have their own fables. They have their own ideas about things. However, they try not to twist them. They extrapolate the truth seed. They extrapolate the truth seed that begins the fable, and they offer that first. And at the end of that, after they have told the truth of where the story came from, the fable has much more effect. They understand the mind of a child is much more literal than the mind of most adults. And that on both sides of this veil. And that's on both sides of the veil. Sorry, I'm reading this, you guys. If you tell a child something, they will believe you and they will take it literally. And that is what happened in the Caucasian cultures, where children grew up believing things that later they had to discover or rearrange in their minds. And this also creates a sense of loss of trust. So that goes on today still. Now we bring the history to the 1920s. One thing about that time in the United States, in 1920 was a jubilee. It was cheerful and fun. There was so much celebration and also a tremendous amount of success. The Fae at that point had thought that perhaps the veil would be lifted. However, what was still happening on this earth was war. And as long as there is war, the Fae will most likely be invisible to humans for their protection. Because real war is what started the separation happening, as time goes by, if that tendency to fight and destroy can be dissolved, then the Fae believe that they will come back into view again. And right now in our world, the veil is thinning. And I don't think it's going to be too much longer before it's gone. And maybe a few years, but I'm hoping that the veil will go away. So in the 1920s, in this country, the energy was frantic, growth-oriented, and on the decadent side. From what Jonathan has learned from this time in history is that the Fae lived very much in the cities, the way the humans do. Some of the Fae lived very well. Some of them did not. However, in the cities, the Fae learned that it was better to stay in nature. Many of them who lived in the cities eventually moved away into nature and stayed there. They also found that there was such a preoccupation with reaching the astral plane. The entire concept of what is called spiritualism, which was a practice built around reaching the dead back then. In the 1920s and all around this time, spiritualism had a lot to do with with gathering to try and reach those on the other side, such as the dead. Sometimes during some of these rituals, their consciousness was raised and hearts were open, completely open, so much that some of these participants would leave a meeting and find that their awareness was enhanced, and they would be able to see some of the Fae briefly. The Fae are part of our world, by the way. They are not on the other side where we go when we die. The Fae go to the other side when they die as well. So just so you know, the Fae exist in our world. So when it rains in our world, they feel it. Everything that goes on in our world goes on in their world. We just can't see them. So it's different when you die. When you die, you're going to a different dimension. The Fae in the United States in the 20th century were learning more and more about the lighter skinned people and culture, and they preferred to be around darker races of people and in nature as well. In Europe, however, anything goes. In Europe, they stayed out in the open as much as they could, and many people saw them because of their opium use back in those days. As far as the other continents, many of them had their own thing going on, their own sensibility about what exists and what does not exist, what is real and what is not real. Now, Russia was a class all its own. There was no question in Russia that Fae exist, and there was no idea one way or another if someone could see them or not. It did not matter. During that time and all through the 20th century, Russian fables were told as a matter of fact, not as a myth or something that came out of one small experience ages ago. In Russia, there was a sense that yes, these things exist, and yes, we know about it. So what? So it was not a big deal. So perhaps because of the different levels of the regimes in Russia, the different ways that things were often limited to the Russian people themselves, seems despair has a way of opening the mind a great deal. And despair is what the people of Russia mostly experience all through the 20th century. In their seeking for answers and hope, quite often they opened their minds and hearts, and they were able to see the fairies. It is not this way so much anymore. However, at that time in Russia, it was not unusual. So that was history number 3. I hope you enjoyed it. Jonathan is going to put together a history number 4. I am currently working on a video that talks about how the Fae get around. They have a vehicle that I guess in their world is kind of like our cars, but nothing like our cars. I'm working on that video, and it's fascinating. So that will be my next video. All of you have a beautiful day. Thank you for joining me.